All right, so the settings have changed. No one's going to notice. Here we go. Never Knows Best is a 2019 TTRPG published by Samyoko Publishing, written and designed by Fraser Simons. It's a Powered by the Apocalypse game where players take on the roles of middle schoolers, that's ages 11 to 14, that transform into robots to fight metaphorical monsters representing societal pressures. It's inspired by the coming of age anime FLCL, or Fooly Cooly, which, as anime go, is a great soundtrack. Never Knows Best is a game of peculiar size and purpose. TTRPGs are a game type where you get a book that unfolds into potentially an enormous play space, but that space can still be quite small and focused. I've talked in the past about getting a big story out of a small book, but Never Knows Best stakes its scope out very deliberately. It's a game for 3 to 5 players, plus a game master, and it's intended to either play out a single session of about 4 hours or a short campaign of 3 to 4 sessions. This is not your dungeon crawler, long hauler, big baller game. This is a game that's aiming for a specific scope and experience. What's more, I'm reading the Ashcan edition of the game here, which is to say a lower production value, somewhat incomplete, underdeveloped version of the game. The game's systems are all here, but examples and supporting tools are missing. Ashcan editions are great, and I recommend you check out the community copies of Never Knows Best. Don't buy it, it's $250 a copy. Take the community copies, that's what they want you to do. As is tradition for Pibtar games, Never Knows Best has an intro and a safety tools section, but they're in that order, and the safety tools section is not overwrought. Then players will build a town in which their characters can exist, and the rest of the book plays out with all the robust structure that Pibtar games offer. The Ashcan edition uses a scribbly notes in a schoolbook kind of aesthetic, which it uses to present, yes, the vibe, but also uses that scribbling to divide up and indicate relationship between chunks of text. Some sections are circled to indicate their boundaries. Some are bracketed to break up complex ideas into more specific parts. Some have lines and arrows drawn from point to point. There's a lot being done with the visuals and the editing and the layout of this book, and it's better than many full products in the same marketplace. The mechanics are well written, and I don't mean that in a it's good for a Pubtar game. I mean they're well written, with clear triggers and broad examples. Pubtar games are fundamentally really good at high concept narratives. They benefit from having a strong conceptual hook that explains what exists in the story without necessarily explaining why. The story doesn't want to explain why teenagers turn into robots necessarily, because that's not really a part of the kind of story it is. That the teenagers turn into robots is the important thing, not the how or the why. There's a reason there's tons of media that plays in a similar space, such as Magical Girl anime, Kamen Rider series, or teen superheroes. It's not hard to imagine wanting to be a teenager who can turn into a robot and punch, like, the idea of income inequality in the face. The system uses a series of labels and traits that remind me a little bit of Fate. If you can bring a label or a trait to bear in a scene, it benefits you when you roll, which means you've a reason to keep in mind the way people are perceived or to express the way they really are when you're constructing the fiction. This is really strong for superheroic style stories, where you're not just constructing the character, you're also answering the question of how is this character perceived by others? Labels are given from player to player. So when you start the game, you each give each other a label of like, oh, this is how I see you. But you can also put labels onto NPCs as a kind of damage system that makes steering stories around scenes easier and more convenient. This is a great way, I think, to turn NPCs from one kind of problem into a different kind of problem by, when you can, applying a label to them that pushes them from prominence. I do want to praise this game in a way that's going to sound odd later, but I think Never Knows Best does a pretty good job of taking ideas from Fully Cooley and reinterpreting them in a very American way. The core ideas of Fully Cooley are expressed really well in the metaphor of teenagers turning into sick robots that beat up weird looking monsters, and there's room for that here in Never Knows Best without feeling like it's trying to ignore the things about Fully Cooley that make it so extremely Japanese. The culture and its counterculture you restructure are framed as very specifically American things, and players integrate with that. Oh, and one other big point of praise. It asks you to think about the music of your counterculture. I think this game could benefit from coming with a soundtrack because I think it has more of a clear, specific idea for what its counterculture is and should be. But I like that it invites you to think of the music for yourself. Still, there is an interesting puzzle with trying to be countercultural while being very American. After all, this is a game that clearly draws from being an anime fan positioned against the man, which, it's an affect. How much against the man can you be when you are from the man's house, taking the man's interpretation of a foreign piece of media into being about your culture, actually? One of the ideas in the opening premise was absolutely ridiculous to me on its face. It suggests you can live in a town built around a hospital, and that hospital is bad for the area, and it's owned by a company. I live in a city built around a hospital, and that hospital is owned by the government, and it specializes in aged care. The idea of a massive corporate privately owned hospital that can be seen as a net evil to a city is completely alien to me. It's one of those ways that being American is very much not being universal, and Americans don't necessarily get that when they think they're talking about everyone and don't realize they're only ever talking about themselves. Because what else could they talk about? They don't know anything else. The game is positively understated with its premise of teenagers transforming into cool robots. And let me tell you, I'm meeting you more than halfway with the idea of these robots being cool, since I think the robots in this art look kind of awful. The art style in general works with what it's trying to do, but I don't think it's good to compare the art here to the expressive, character-driven stuff in Fully Cooley and the incredible robot design by some of the most influential artists in the field. The book also includes 0 examples of the kind of monsters you're fighting, which brings up the next problem. This high-concept book is awful at making its actual high concept sound cool. Here is the opening paragraphs of this rulebook. Never Knows Best is a role-playing game about middle school kids facing impending adulthood, growing up, and society's sometimes nonsensical expectations and obligations. It's designed for 3 to 5 players plus a game master, GM, who facilitates the game. The game uses absurdism, metaphors, motifs, and literalizations to represent the struggles and growth these kids go through. Society's obligations and expectations manifest as outrageous forms, creatures and monsters not of this world. The kids combat these creatures by transforming into robots. Whenever a kid transforms, their robot takes on their unique strengths and traits, representing how they reject society's attempts to make kids conform and obey. Now, notice how this mentions kids turning into robots after the phrase motifs and literalization. I feel like this is a really wasted opportunity to make the game sound cool up front. This description of the game is the kind of thing I'd say when summarizing and explaining the higher concepts of the game in an essay. For a game approach, I think I'd recommend leading with how Never Knows Best is a TTRPG where you play teenagers fighting monsters by turning into sick robots, and then use the deeper textual explanation as the follow-up for when the storyteller is building the game. I don't know. I don't think Pibtar makes you bad at writing or anything, but it does feel like Pibtar assumes it doesn't need to convince you to play it. It is a no-prep game, which can be fun for players and storytellers who like that. The Ashcan edition is also completely lacking in example threats or complications, which means it's only good if you only like no-prep games. If you're the kind of person who likes having structural support like monsters or NPCs or maps, all that kind of thing, then this game is not helpful to you. Which I understand Pibtar fans will advocate as a good thing, actually, because it's better when fewer people can play your game. I don't understand these arguments sometimes. And yes, that was an uncharitable representation, but someone was going to say it. The way you build your character has a really interesting kind of problem to it, something I don't see in many narrative games, which is it's entirely possible that between traits and hidden traits, desirable and undesirable, it can be easy to slip up and put something in the wrong category. That is, it's possible to mess up building your character in this story game in the way it makes the character harder to play. And I'm not used to the idea of flow with the story, easygoing narrative, triggers and moves having an actual skill flaw. Also, the game tables the idea of PvP conflict almost immediately, which never bodes well for games in my opinion. Look, this all may sound unduly harsh, and I know at a certain point I'm going to have to stop talking about PBTA games, just because there are only so many ways to say this system seems to cook your brains for talking to people who don't love it. Look, Never Knows Best is such an incredible uphill walk for me. It's very American. It's very American anime fan. It's very American anime fan of an anime I don't think is good. It's very American fan of an anime I don't think is very good as told through a Powered by the Apocalypse game. The game and I may care about similar things, like the importance of rebellion against oppressive forces, and do so in such completely contrary ways. I wanted to see a book of teens turning into cool robots to fight weird, interesting monsters, and this book has literally none of that to show me. And yet, despite all these things that I think can reasonably be called failures for this game, I think this game sounds really good. I think this game could be useful for a really cool single-session movie night style narrative about how people feel about one another, with an occasional sick robot spin-kicking an enemy labeled like NIMBYism. I think Never Knows Best is a cool game, and all my complaints can come down to I wish there was more of it, and I wish it was better. That's a pretty good recommendation for a game, in my opinion, especially when it's being given away for free. This video was made in part thanks to the support of my patrons over on Patreon, and I don't have a slide for that this time. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all. Except for you, Jerome.